Hey, all you cool cats and kittens, welcome back to Wreck and Rule. This is Brian talking to you right now. If you've not already read about it or heard about it, we are on a temporary hiatus during the social distancing and the quarantine, quite simply just because our usual method of recording, of going to Joe's house and jamming out a bunch of games, does not work. But I did want to throw at you guys. I've been trying to get this recorder for a while, but just the situation has not worked out well. This is a deck that I've been playing on Octagon. I began to theorycraft it back before the delay for Wave 5 was announced, and I've been having a lot of fun with it. It's not going to go win any big giant tournaments, but it's got some tricks to it and has some fun plays. I call it Detritus the Beastmaster. So if you're not already using fortressmaximus.io, I definitely recommend it. You're able to build a deck. It gives you a whole bunch of different statistics about your deck, your percentage of different pip colors in there, your percentage of, say, weapons to armor to utility to actions, also extremely helpful. The coolest feature if you play on Octagon is that you can export your deck as a Octagon file, and then you can import it into Octagon without having to manually build it in Octagon itself, which is pretty neat. If you've not tried playing on Octagon, at first I was a little bit intimidated, but after trying it a couple of times and getting some help from people who are playing there, it all kind of does make sense. And really, if you just right click intuitively where you think a certain function should work, it typically does. And then if it doesn't work, the people who are playing there have been incredibly helpful to new players, to Octagon, and they're willing to definitely help you out if you're getting stuck. I'll make sure that I link to both fortressmaximus.io, and there's also a Facebook group dedicated to Octagon Play. If you have a good webcam setup, I know that there's also a Facebook group dedicated to playing via webcam. Unfortunately, I don't have a great setup for that, but if that's you, then you'll find a bunch of other people playing there as well. Without any further ado, let's get into the deck itself. So to begin with, we have to take a look at Detritus because he is kind of, sort of, the centerpiece of the deck, although all three characters do have pretty powerful effects. I first began to mess around with Detritus at the Invitational when I pulled him for the sealed portion and discovered that he was a lot of fun to play. Before that, I had not messed with him at all, and I'd pull three of them and basically was trying desperately to trade with people who didn't have one yet so that I could fill in gaps in what I had. So the big selling point here in this deck is that Detritus is a merc, and that gives you access to Opportune Offensive, which is, I think, probably the best blue black pip card that we have available, with 3 attack and 3 pierce to a Decepticon. Definitely can get work done. So you want to pair him, I've found, with Decepticons. Beyond that, he's also ranged. That gives you access to a couple tricky plays as well. So his bot mode at first might seem to be the flashier of the two. If you attack with him and he does enough damage to kill an enemy, he is able to repair 3. So if you can get a decent armor onto him, and if you can kind of mitigate the damage coming into you, then you can keep him on the table for quite a bit, especially with 14 health behind 2 defense. And then if you can get an energy pack onto him, give him some more health, make him even more survivable. So that bounty can definitely get some work done. You do have to try to time it at the correct moment where he's the one who attacks and KOs an enemy, though. But what I found to be more interesting, though, was his alt mode, specifically that flip into his alt mode, because when you do that, you're able to play a black pip card, and that doesn't have to be a card that's played on him. So if you have, let's say, like Smoke Cloak, you can play that onto a different character. Lets you get more than one upgrade card out in a turn, lets you get more than one action out in a turn. And then you can get some really surprising plays with that. And even before the Wave 5 cards came out, I was doing some pretty weird janky things with him with the Wave 4 stuff that was available. Specifically, I was focusing pretty hard on range and direct damage. But you guys will be hearing about this new guy quite a bit here. Horribull, if you've not already heard a ton about him, you're going to in the coming months. He's definitely going to be very powerful. I was holding out hope that we would get a couple of beast battle cards to play off of the plethora of beasts that we have coming out in Wave 5, but it was not meant to be. The big thing about Horribull, of course, is going to be his body mode, where when you play a Black Pip card, again, doesn't have to be played onto him or affect him. You could put that Smoke Cloak onto a different character. You can still trigger Horribull's ability, and it's not limited to any amount of times per turn. So when you play it, you do a damage to Horribull, and then a damage to, let's rewind that. You do a damage to an enemy and then do 1 damage to Horribull, is how that plays out. So if you are able to play a Black Pip upgrade and an action, you are putting out 2 damage onto an enemy, beyond whatever effects those cards might have. You are, of course, also doing 2 damage to Horribull. Now, his flip into beast mode is also important. When you flip, you can move 1 damage from him to an enemy. It heals you a little bit. Now, you will notice that Horribull kinda has low health at only 9. Of course, what you want to start to do here is you want to use Detritus' flip into alt mode to play an additional Black Pip card to trigger the body mode more frequently. So you want to have Horribull in body mode when you flip Detritus back into alt mode. It just kind of gives you some more plays there. I'm using Kreb with Horribull because it gives him 2 health. It boosts you up from 9 to 11, which helps. At the very least, it'll make it unlikely that he's going to be one-shot on the very first attack coming into him. If your opponent has some tricks going on, I've seen some nasty things with, say, Wind Charger and the Battle Patrol member that allows you to put I think an upgrade onto a character. I think Flak is the one. So like you can have Wind Charger attacking 7 attack native and then throw a grenade launcher onto him, puts him at 11 attack before you start to flip cards, which can definitely be dangerous for this character if you don't flip any blue on defense. So you do want to kind of be mindful of that. And then a savvy opponent is going to go after Horribull early. This way you are limited at how much play you get out of his body mode right there. So Kreb, he's basically there to pop off, which actually has a pretty big effect in the game, more of an effect than I thought it was going to, based on the games I've played so far on Octagon. Beyond that, like the 2 health will help him to where he's not going to just get taken out by like an armed hovercraft. With that said though, 2 health is not a lot, so there's a lot of different ways that he can still get killed before he's able to activate on his turn. And then rounding out the list, we also have Fangry. So again, the real reason why I put these 2 together at first was that they fit price-wise. They both come out to be 7 stars with their respective heads attached to them as well. So they fit with Detritus. We get to 25 exactly. But I've since found that like Fangry also gets a ton of work done. And so here his alt mode ability is beast mode. When he attacks an enemy that has more stars, he gets bold 2. His body mode, when he is defending against an enemy that has fewer stars, he has tough 2, and both of those can be helpful depending upon what situation you're in. And then over the course of a game, unless of course you have another 7-star character that you are either attacking or being attacked by, you're going to be able to get some play out of that. We'll talk more about that in just a little bit. I'm pairing Fangry with Vorath to give him a native tough 1, which can be helpful because I tend to like to use him as my initial attacker to go in there. So when he gets attacked back, that tough 1 is going to help out if he's staying in his beast mode. Now obviously he's going to bump up to tough 3 if he's in his body mode and then he's being attacked back by a smaller character. Vorath does only have 1 health, so you do have to be mindful. He's very easy to be taken out before he activates. To go through the deck I've been using. Now this is probably not the optimized deck, but this is what I've been using lately and it seems to work pretty well. Take a look at weapons first. 3 handheld blasters, those are mostly there for the double blue. They can, if you're, I don't know, if you've got no other real options, and let's say if you have multiple cards in hand but none of the other ones really help you, putting it onto a character will help you to maybe fish for some additional black pips, or maybe for some of the relatively, well, not relatively, very few orange pip cards that are in the deck. So mainly you want to see it on defense, but you can also get a little bit of use out of it if you have to use it as an actual upgrade. Running 3 Sturdy Javelin. Now, Detritus is the only ranged character. The other 2 characters are melee, but with that said, for both of them, it will bump them up to either 5 or 6 attack, depending upon what mode they're in. And with all of the black pips that we have, it is not going to be uncommon that we just get that full attack value as Pierce. So they're going to hit for 6, Pierce 6. So even though we probably prefer to have this on Detritus, we are not really upset if it goes on to one of the other 2 instead. Fusion Borer is an amazing card. It's going to be hard for me not to put this into every deck. So it gives you 3 attack and Pierce 3, which a lot of the weapons that grant you Pierce, or even the actions that grant you Pierce, they don't have that 1-to-1 parity with the attack that they give you. But the fact that Fusion Borer does is a huge deal. Now, if you can use that with Opportune Offensive, then you are giving your Decepticon character that turn plus 6 attack, plus 6 Pierce, and it's relatively likely that what you flip on attack, you'll get the additional Pierce to where the entire attack that you have is just going to straight up do damage to that enemy character. Running 2 Energon Axes in here, your characters will be taking damage. You have ways to self-damage as well. Horribull always has that active. There are other cards in there, for example, Scouting Mission, where you can damage your own character, draw 2 cards, and then you've got that damage. Now you can play Energon Axe. So solid blue weapon, running 2 of it, and we will be taking damage. Finally, we have Scoundrel's Blaster. So we've got 2 Decepticons. If we see it early before one of those 2 dies, or before they both die, that's good. And if you're attacking an Autobot, it has that 1-to-1 parity of the plus 2 attack and the Pierce 2 as well. We're only doing 1 of it though, just because Detritus will probably be the endgame character, and he can't use it. So we don't really want to kind of have, you have no cards in hand, it's getting near the end of the game, you draw a card. You don't want that to be the card that you draw, because it has no effect at that point. If we take a look at armor and upgrades, I'm running 3 versions of extra padding. I've preferred this as the tough armor just because the green pip means that you can find it. You could maybe make an argument to change these to sparring gear, in which case you've got the orange green pip instead, and you're going to see more oranges when you flip for attack. But then conversely, you're going to see those oranges more frequently when you flip for defense. And the name of the game here is to try to soak up as much damage as you can, try to stave off as much damage as you can, and then just kind of chip back with Pierce whenever you can. If you can do a little bit, great. If you can get a lot of Pierce, even better. We are running 3 Smoke Cloak. The tough one is not fantastic. However, we do like that it gives us a black pip, so we're going to run 3 of it here. You can maybe make an argument, I'll talk about this later, that you go for Terrifying Resilience instead, because it gives you that orange-black. But again, we want to try to defend. Now, if with Wave 5, like Pierce just becomes ubiquitous, which is a possibility based upon some things that I'm seeing online with what people are playing, then maybe you go with the Terrifying Resilience, because at that point, blue doesn't matter as much when you flip it on defense. Unless you have tricks. For utilities, we're going to run 2. 1 pocket processor. It's hard not to put at least 1 into a deck. The extra card draw is invaluable, especially because we have certain cards like padding. And then when we go back to Detritus for a moment, when you flip and you're playing 3 cards a turn rather than 2, like, you will kind of go through your hand pretty quickly. So one way that we have to refill that is the pocket processor. We also have energy pack in there as well. We're hoping to see it. We're hoping to put this onto Detritus, especially like mid to end game. is where we want to see that. If we see it on attack, great. If we see it on defense, womp womp. Actions now. Checkpoint. It's mostly there for the 3 blue pips. With that said though, we have the ability to play multiple upgrades in a turn. So with Detritus flipping, with him flipping, if we can get 2 upgrades out of our hand and then play that checkpoint to limit what the other player can do, not too shabby. Opportune offensive, already talked about a little bit. Probably my favorite blue-black action in the game. The +3 attack and 3 pierce, hugely gets work done. You do have to keep in mind that it does not work on Detritus, so if you get this when he's the character that's left, it's kind of a sad moment. But you want to see this early is when you want to see it. Steady shot, the +2 attack is not fantastic, however the blue-black is. And then basically any attack boost that we can give, we will probably be seeing pierce that kind of comes out of it as well. So you can usually just push that damage through. So any additional damage you can get is going to be helpful. Also running 3 scouting missions, it will activate your Energon Axe if you need it. You can use it to ping an enemy character that has 1 damage left on it. You can use it sometimes to ping your own Titan Master body to kill it off, to pop off the head in case you need to kind of like change the sequence of activations that will be coming up. If you have a character that your only character that was left, but if you can instead activate the Titan Master head instead when it does pop off, it just kind of gives you some tricks that your opponent might not expect. You do again have to be mindful just because the Titan Master heads are extremely fragile, so if you pop it off, it is not going to be uncommon that they die to an armed hovercraft or an opposing Horribull or something like that. But it does give you options and can surprise your opponent. This is also one of our ways to draw additional cards in case we kind of find our hand to be empty because of Detritus giving you those extra black pip cards that you can play. Going to run 2 copies of dual wield. The double black pip is helpful. We ideally want to throw this onto Detritus and have a weapon already onto him and then pull the weapon from the scrap onto him as well. If you can have him swinging with like 2 Energon Axes, that's great. Have him swinging with 2 fusion borers, that's also fantastic. But any weapon you can get, good. Also good to pull sturdy javelins back, and like if you have an opposing character, 2 health left, can definitely get some work done. Wedge formation kind of becomes essentially a retrievable zap when you play it with Horribull, because you will be you'll be healing a damage, but at the same time you'll also be taking a damage, so it kind of like just evens out with Horribull. On top of that, it can also help you to draw cards, so we'll go for that too if you're fishing to see certain things. We've got 2 copies of Work Overtime because we are hopefully going to play multiple cards per turn, so it helps you to refill your hand if you're running light. Forgot to mention too, this is relatively few oranges that we have, so it does also help to kind of like flip it to help you get that +1 attack, +1 pierce for wedge formation. Smelt is there because it's a retrievable blue upgrade removal. It does have the downside where your opponent chooses what card they're going to get rid of, but you can retrieve it. So if you have some like actions in hand especially that are not helpful, switching out Smelt at least will give you some play. And then 1 copy of Reprocess, you can use it in a couple of different ways. Obviously, you can use it to get rid of upgrades on your opposing character. The ideal play is that you get rid of an upgrade on one of their characters that has no damage done to them yet. This way that repairing 2 from them does not give them a benefit. But you can also use it to get rid of an upgrade on your own character to heal it up a little bit. And if you're going to replace a weapon with a weapon anyway, healing 2 along the way can make a big difference. There's enough blue in here and enough ways to get tough that you can be pretty survivable. So getting rid of some of that damage that you take in can be helpful. Now, I kind of mentioned this earlier, but I've got a feeling that these double blue pip cards in defensive decks may or may not continue to be 3-ofs, especially the handheld blaster. Checkpoint does have utility, so if you're going against an opposing player that has a lot of Pierce, those cards aren't really going to give you a ton of benefit. So I probably would swap out at that point the checkpoints for Magnetic Dysfunction Ray. Again, this card is going to be really great. You're going to see it a lot. People will be talking about it a lot. In our case, we don't have any Autobots, so we don't have to worry about that extra 1 damage. Orange-black means that you're getting +1 attack, +1 pierce. And then we talked a little bit already about Terrifying Resilience, and again, kind of the same thing here. Now, the downside is that it's not like tough if pierce becomes a bigger thing. Tough is not going to help you much, but I still like the option, and they're not going to always get their full pierce effect. So as of right now, like these would probably be in my sideboard. Now the rest of it, I don't totally know yet. I have to think through that a little bit more. In terms of like the typical sequence of play, so this is what you're going to have at the beginning of the game. If your opponent is going to go first, a lot of the time, like typically in the past, they would go for Detritus because they want to get damage onto him to get him off the board so he's not healing a lot, in what I found in previous versions of decks that used him. But most likely now, if your opponent is going to go first, they're going to probably target Horribull, again, to limit like the amount of damage that you can ping out to them, because again, you have to deal damage to yourself when that happens. In which case, generally, you want to have him be your last attacker. This way he is less vulnerable to your opponent killing him. So typically my, whether I'm going first or second, when it's my turn to go, what I like to do is I like to flip Horribull. This way that ability is active and you can start playing black pip cards when you've got the opportunity to start putting that direct damage onto your opponent. From there, I like to swing in with Fangry, ideally against whatever their biggest and scariest character is, if they're available to me. Now, obviously, if your opponent went first, you have to target who they swung in with. But a lot of times, unless maybe it's like Braun, who's only 5 stars, then probably if they want to do damage to Horribull, they're coming in with someone who's a little bit beefier. So Fangry, going against that opposing character, can get a lot of work done, especially if they have that, if they have more stars than he does, because you're going to be doing at least 4 pierce 4, because with that bolt 2 you should see your black pip cards. 4 damage is enough to make them think about sending them out as an attacker, because if you can kind of get the right sequence of plays going, Detritus is going to come in and hit pretty hard. So ideally, Fangry goes in there if you're going first and like puts some damage onto their biggest, scariest character. From there, when it comes back to you again, for your next activation, I like to flip Detritus, get him into bot mode. Now, if he can get the kill, well, actually, at this point, if he gets the kill, he's not healing because he's not taking damage. But you want to maybe hope that your opponent starts to see Detritus as being a little bit scarier, so he or she focuses less on Fangry and more on Detritus. But you want to throw him out there, you want to keep Horribull back. You're also doing that because you are setting up for the next turn to flip Detritus back into his alt mode to play extra black pip cards with Horribull to kind of get some work done right there. At this point, Fangry may or may not be dead. You can maybe even draw this out more by having Vorath attack before Horribull goes. It all kind of depends on what your opponent is running. But that's the general sequence, and at this point, you should be in pretty good shape. Now, with that said, at this point, these 2 characters are probably in very rough shape. Detritus may or may not be basically untouched, and hopefully by now, you've gotten on some cards onto him, whether energy pack, uh, pocket processor, a decent weapon, a decent armor. This way he can be that strong late game character where he can get a lot of work done. I've had quite a few games go where like these two die fairly early, but Detritus is untouched, and then he kind of gets the job done. Like he's able to take out the other characters, and he loves to see Titan Master heads pop off because he can kill them and he can get that heal back to heal up for 3. Want to also mention, even though Fangry does die pretty early, and I did kind of talk about this a little bit, is if he is facing a lot of enemies that are a lower star cost, can get pretty insane with his tough value. So he's got that built-in tough 2. If the attacking enemy has fewer stars, the head gives him tough 1, so we're at tough 3, and then an armor can give him at least another tough 1. So we're sitting at tough 4. And at that point, ideally, like we don't have a ton of white pips, but probably you flip one at that point because you're flipping at least 6 cards. So like he can be survivable if you don't have a lot of Pierce coming in at you. So that's something to kind of keep in mind there. With the 2 Titan Master heads, I talked about this briefly, but you're going to find if you've not played either via webcam or on Octagon, that the Titan Master heads popping off really does change the game quite a bit. And a lot of cases, like you lose, it messes up your own sequencing because you're not thinking about the fact that you might be able to like have an extra activation that you weren't planning on having. So it's going to kind of take everybody in general some time to kind of like get used to that and what that could possibly mean. So do keep that in mind. The other thing to be aware of is that these guys can also like start hitting pretty scary if you get the right sequence of cards in your hand at the right time. And the other thing I like a lot with running 2 Titan Masters with a Merc is that even when the body does die, you can still use those opportune offensives on these guys. And let's say, for example, if you're able to get the Fusion Borer and opportune offensive, you've got +6 attack and you've got 6 Pierce, right? So you're at 8 attack. You should get those last 2 black pip cards to flip out. Either of these 2 guys at that point is hitting with 8 attack, 8 Pierce. Now, is it going to always happen where you get that magic, like, full on attack? No, but you could also get, say, a Scoundrel's Blaster, right? And if you attack an Autobot, you've got +2 attack and 2 Pierce as well. They can hit for more damage than people think they're going to hit for. So again, like this list, it does give you some tricks to play. So I did mention this already. Detritus is likely to be your very last character on the board, and he is extremely survivable. So if you've not had a chance to play around with him, I do highly recommend it. Again, this is not going to be a card that is going to take down like the big scary Galaxy Optimus list, and then there's, I'm sure, a lot of crazy things people are brewing up right now. But if you want something more casual and more fun to try out, I do highly recommend it. I'll make sure that when I post this video, I link to the deck list on fortressmaximus.io. This way you guys can check it out on your own as well. Keep in mind, easiest way to kind of stay in touch with what we're doing is to follow us on Facebook. So check out our Facebook page. Beyond that, we do have a Patreon. We don't like to, hit you guys over the head with it, and we're probably really bad at promoting it, but we do use it to upgrade our setup. We've been able to do quite a bit with camera quality. We're still playing a lot with lighting at Joe's house, but every little bit does help, and we kind of directly put it back into, for one, upgrading our setup, but for two, we like to reward you guys with cool things for helping us out. So if you were a patron in, I think it was February and March, we sent you guys some Springer inspired damage tokens. So we kind of throw cool stuff out there. So if you are not checking us out on Patreon, consider checking that out too. Again, I hope that you guys are doing well. I hope that your families are doing well. I hope that you're getting through. And keep watching. We'll have more stuff, and wreck and rule.